Welcome to Time Wisdom. Imagine standing at the edge of your greatest dream and seeing your worst nightmare guarding it. After 40 torturous years in the wilderness, Israel finally saw promise. Behind them was the arid dust, and before them was Canaan's lush greenery. The land sworn to their fathers was the dream that kept hope alive through enslavement and starvation. They saw no jubilation over the Jordan River. The hush was oppressive. Moses died. The Titan who parted the Red Sea and met God was gone. Now they were alone. The terrain ahead was not empty. It was a graveyard of possibility, packed with walled cities, iron chariots, and giants that made grown men shudder. The promise was right there, but the way to accomplish it looked difficult. Have you ever stood so close to a breakthrough, yet felt immobilized by the barriers in your way? Israel was frozen. They were a tribe of nomads living in tents with no professional army and no leader. Who could possibly fill the shoes of Moses? In that vacuum of fear, God did not speak to the crowd. He spoke to one man, Joshua. Joshua was not a prophet in the same mold as Moses. He was a soldier, a dedicated assistant who had wandered in the shadow of grandeur for decades. Now the spotlight switched to him. God's command was direct and terrifyingly straightforward. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan. There was no time to lament. It was time to move. But God recognized the crushing weight on Joshua's shoulders, so he gave him a pledge that echoes through history. Be powerful and courageous. Do not be afraid or dismayed, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Victory would not come from military strategy, but from obedience. The condition was non-negotiable. Do not turn from the law to the right or to the left. Joshua stared toward the horizon. The first obstacle was Jericho, a city that historians tell us is one of the oldest in the world. To the Israelites, it looked like a mountain of stone built by gods. Its twin walls towered 40 feet into the sky. Before relocating 2 million people, Joshua needed wisdom. He dispatched 2 spies into the city not to fight, but to monitor. They found safety in the most improbable location possible, the residence of a prostitute named. Her residence was erected inside the city wall itself, a dwelling for the downtrodden and the outcast. When the king of Jericho hunted them down, made a choice that would change her destiny. She hid the enemies of her people under bundles of flax on her roof. Why? Why would a woman sacrifice all for strangers? Up on the roof, under the cover of darkness, she explained her genuine intentions. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea. The world was afraid not of Israel, but of Israel's God. In exchange for her loyalty, she asked for a covenant, a promise of life for her family. The spies told her to hang a scarlet cord in her window. In Hebrew, the word for cord is which also translates to hope. Didn't just hang a rope, she hung her hope for the world to see. With the intelligence obtained, the time had come to cross the Jordan, but nature stood in the way. It was harvest time, and the river was high with melting snow, overflowing its banks. It was a wild, muddy torrent that no person could traverse. Yet Joshua gave a weird command. Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will perform incredible things among you. The priests lifted the Ark of the Covenant, the golden box, signifying the very presence of God, and marched toward the rushing torrent. They didn't wait for the water to divide. They had to step in first. This is a fundamental spiritual idea. Often the miracle does not happen until your foot reaches the water. As soon as their sandals brushed the surface, the flow upstream stopped dead. The rivers piled up as if kept back by an invisible hand, and the riverbed dried up. 2 million people walked over in quiet, leaving the wilderness behind forever. To mark this event, Joshua asked 12 men to take 12 stones from the center of the riverbed. They built a monument in. Why? Because human memory is unstable. We forget the miracles of yesterday when we face the battles of today. Joshua stated these stones would be a symbol so that when future generations inquired what they meant, fathers might tell their sons that God blocked off the waters of the Jordan. With the river behind them, they faced Jericho. But the strategy God gave Joshua was puzzling. No siege engines, no battering hammers, just a parade. For 6 days, the troops strolled around the city in complete quiet, accompanied only by the haunting sound of shofar horns. Imagine the psychological dread inside the city. They expected a war cry, but heard only the repetitive thud of boots and the burst of trumpets. On the 7th day, they circled 7 times. Then the command came. Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. A roar of faith broke from the lungs of a people who had been slaves, and the walls did not merely fracture, they crumbled. They fell flat, allowing the soldiers to charge right in. Amidst the dust and slaughter, only one part of the wall remained standing. The portion with the crimson cord, and her family were saved, proving that even under judgment, grace may be found. Victory may be intoxicating, And sometimes our greatest failures occur shortly after our greatest accomplishments. Flush with confidence, Joshua turned his eyes to a small village called. It was a blip on the map compared to Jericho. His spies, arrogant and overconfident, told him not to bother deploying the whole army. Just a few thousand would do, but they had forgotten to consult God. When the army marched on, they were routed, chased down the hill like frightened animals. 36 guys died. It wasn't a big bloodbath, but it broke the air of invincibility. Joshua fell on his face, shredding his clothes. He asked God why he had brought them there only to be annihilated. God's answer was sharp. Get up. Israel has sinned. The problem wasn't the power of the adversary, it was the corruption in the camp. A man named had taken a Babylonian robe and bars of gold from Jericho, directly defying God's mandate to destroy everything. He had hidden them under his tent, believing no one would know, but concealed sins rarely stay secret. They infect the whole community. His greed cost 36 families their sons. The judgment was severe, and his family were relocated, and the place where they died was named the Valley of Trouble. Only once the sin was purged did God offer the strategy for triumph. This time it wasn't a miracle, it was a superb ambush. Joshua drew the hubris of out into the open, while a covert force torched their city behind them. It brings us to a tough fact. Sometimes we cannot move forward unless we deal with what is buried in our tent. News of these successes spread like wildfire. The kings of Canaan forged a huge coalition to destroy this invading force, but the inhabitants chose a different route: deception. They dressed in tatters and brought rotten bread, pretending to be travelers from a distant nation. They duped Joshua into signing a peace deal. When the falsehood was uncovered, Joshua kept his word. He could not breach a pledge made in God's name. This integrity forced him into one of the hardest struggles of his life. 5 Amorite kings besieged, and Joshua had to defend his new deceitful allies. He marched all night and made a surprise attack, but as the conflict continued, the sun began to drop. If darkness fell, the enemy would escape to regroup. Joshua needed more time. He needed more light. In front of all his men, he stared at the sky and shouted, "Sun, stay still above, and you moon over the valley of," and the universe obeyed. The earth ceased its spin, or the light was supernaturally prolonged. We do not know the physics, but we know the result. The day did not end until the victory was accomplished. It was the day God listened to the voice of a man. The struggle for the promised land was not a brief campaign. It lasted years, 7 years of sleeping in armor and fighting giants. Yes, giants. The same terrors that had scared the previous generation were still there, but this time Israel did not run, they fought, and among them was an ancient warrior named Caleb. At 85 years old, Caleb stood before Joshua. He didn't ask for a retirement villa near the water. He said, "Give me this mountain." He asked for Hebron, the stronghold of the giants. He said, "I am as strong this day as I was on the day Moses sent me." Caleb reminds us that faith does not retire. He drove out the giants and claimed his inheritance, proving that the size of the enemy does not matter while God is waging the battle. Slowly, the countryside was subdued. Joshua distributed the area among the tribes. Maps were drawn, borders were set. The nomads finally had a home, but there were flaws in the foundation. The tribe of Judah could not push the out of Jerusalem. The tribe of allowed the Canaanites to live among them as slave laborers. They chose economic convenience above total obedience. They didn't realize it yet, but they were planting the seeds of their own downfall. Those pockets of resistance would become the thorns that would rend Israel apart in the centuries to come. Finally, the war ceased. Joshua, now an old man of 110 years, gathered the leaders at. This was the spot where Abraham had first received the promise. The cycle was closing. Joshua didn't brag about his military successes. He talked about memory. He told them that if they forgot who gave them the land, they would lose it. He gave an ultimatum that sounds in our ears today. Choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we shall serve the Lord. The people pledged they would follow God. Joshua picked a huge stone and laid it under an oak tree as a witness against them. He knew the fickleness of the human heart. Joshua died and was buried in the hill area of, and in a quiet fulfillment of a 400-year-old vow, the bones of Joseph were interred nearby. Joseph, who had dreamed of this day while governing in Egypt, was finally home. The promise was kept. The land was theirs. But the book of Joshua finishes with a terrible shadow. It tells us that Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua, but a generation arose after them that did not know the Lord or the miracles he had done. Memory faded. The flames of conquering transformed into the ash of complacency. They had overcome the giants on the battlefield, but they would soon be crushed by the horrors within. The period of the judges was reaching a dark spiral of turmoil and blood. But that is a story for another time. If you want to grasp the patterns of history and the spiritual principles that govern our existence, you must look back to see forward. Subscribe to the wisdom of time as we continue to unearth these ancient teachings. The trip is just beginning.